Hey everybody, it's Sunday. We're going to make another one of these as if live videos. No script, just going to look at some headlines and talk about what's going on lately. Of course, the huge news this week is the Terra UST collapse. And one interesting thing about all of that is Terra and UST were brought down by instability, but instability instigated by what? Some people think that the price of Bitcoin dropped naturally, organically, market forces, and that destabilized UST and Terra. But there are other people who think that there was an active hand in this. A lot of people don't want to talk about this stuff because they think, oh, it's a conspiracy theory. I have no evidence. I shouldn't be propagating those ideas. Here's the reality, you guys. I wear my tinfoil hats pretty openly. I think that powerful people conspire for power. That's what makes them powerful, right? They want it, they make plans, and then they execute those plans without broadcasting their plans. That's a conspiracy. They happen all the time. Regardless, there is some evidence to suggest that the UST Terra pair were taken down not just because they destabilized and died, but they were attacked and killed. And whether or not you believe that, it begs the question. I'm a believer in the stability and long-term strength of the Bitcoin network, particularly, that it is unique amongst all cryptocurrencies. So what would you do if you were a highly motivated, highly funded actor and you wanted to attack and kill Bitcoin? How would you do it? What would the attack look like? Well, I've been thinking about this, and it's not obvious. There aren't clear ways to accomplish this, but use your creativity. The US military does this all the time. This is war games. You threat model. How would somebody attack and kill this thing that we value very much? Here are a couple ways that I think people could potentially attack and kill Bitcoin. Also important to note. As this conspiracy theory was floating around, several groups stepped up to say, we had nothing to do with it. Gemini, Citadel, BlackRock, Celsius Network, there were several others. All of them made official statements saying we had no hand in destabilizing the Terra UST pair. Now, the fact that they have denied this openly does not mean that they didn't actually have a hand in it. It means that if you were going to do this, you would plan on denying it afterward. If somebody did this, their lawyers would instruct them immediately to deny that they had any part of it. You destabilized this incredibly valuable cryptocurrency. Really? You can't prove it. Try proving it. With blockchains, it's interesting because there is a digital footprint. There's forensics that you can run to try to figure out exactly what was going on. But of course, there are ways to obscure that. And if somebody were coordinating this scale of attack, they would definitely take measures to obscure any hand they had in the part. Really, as I see it, there are two major threat vectors for the Bitcoin network itself. And if somebody wanted to execute this today, one, I don't think any potential attackers are in a place to do this, and I don't think the network is in a place where it would work. But look into the future, imagine, if you will, in the not distant future, a couple things, trends continue in a certain direction, and here's what it could look like. During Franklin Delano Roosevelt's presidency, he actually outlawed the personal ownership of gold. There was a decree issued, in fact, let me pull that up, Executive Order 6102. Under Executive Order of the President, all persons are required to deliver on or before May 1st, 1933, all gold coin, gold bullion, and gold certificates now owned by them to the Federal Reserve Bank branch or agency or to any member of the Federal Reserve System. They paid you, in dollars, what seemed like a healthy rate for that gold that they confiscated. And then as soon as they had enacted this and confiscated all of the gold coins and bullion, they announced that the actual price of an ounce of gold was much higher than what they'd actually paid. Surprise, surprise, the federal government did not take care of the individual rights of the people. Under what circumstances could Bitcoin face a similar fate? That could happen if most or all of the Bitcoin was stored with custodians. Who are custodians? Well, you're familiar with names like Gemini and Coinbase and Celsius Network. These are companies that effectively operate like banks. They're not functionally that different. Instead of using US dollars, they're using cryptocurrencies. And they have the infrastructure and the rail on the back end to handle all of that. But functionally, these are banks. It's not you being your own bank, it's Gemini or Coinbase being your own bank. So while on the one hand, these services are simple and they help people get introduced into the ecosystem, for an incredible number of people, the first cryptocurrency that they bought was through Coinbase. But the other half of that equation is if Coinbase is holding your coins, then they're not really yours, are they? Not your keys, not your coins, as they say. The other obvious criticism of Coinbase, there are many, but one is that it is a casino where they list all kinds of cryptos that have no real implicit inherent value and will not retain value for who knows, days, weeks, months if you're lucky. That's just what's going to happen if you're dealing with tens of thousands of speculative currencies. So the Coinbases of the world are hosting your coins. They hold them, and if you want to do something with those, you have to ask permission. Coinbase, will you please send my coins to this other user or to this outside wallet? If most or all of the Bitcoin is in a situation like that where custodians are holding and managing it, then it is a trivial matter for somebody like the federal government to issue an executive order, not unlike what happened in 1933. So what's the lesson here? Hold your coins yourself. I understand the convenience of holding them on an exchange. I understand the attraction of earning interest off of something that is held by a third party. But for numerous reasons that we won't go into here, it's not just executive orders. Rehypothecating is a word you might want to look up. This is when you lend to the bank and the bank lends to somebody else and then they lend to somebody else. And it creates a chain of dependencies where if one person fails to pay, if one person defaults, all of you go down, including you, the actual owner. I have definitely used these. I introduced a lot of people to Coinbase and Gemini and others over the years, but frankly, I do not at this point recommend holding anything really there. If you want to buy through these services for the convenience, I guess that's fine. There will definitely be a paper record showing that you bought and probably now hold these things. But definitely don't keep your coins on exchanges. You're going to want to use a hardware wallet. I've used the Ledger wallets in the past and have liked those. There's a link down below for that if you want to pick one up. The other attack vector that could be used to attack Bitcoin is the mining network. So imagine the following scenario. Imagine there's a political regime that wants to attract miners. They just create an environment where it's very attractive to operate from there. Maybe you get green energy subsidies or something. And then a huge flood of miners come to that geography, that jurisdiction, and begin operating there. Over time, if a majority of the mining network operates in a given jurisdiction, then that jurisdiction will have inordinate sway over how the miners operate, including, theoretically, they could require them to exclude certain transactions that the jurisdiction doesn't approve of. Now you're at odds with that miner's self-interest. They may not like censoring the transactions that come through, but they might financially be forced to. What's interesting about this theory is that while it's theoretically possible, I don't think there's any political will to make something like this happen. I've mentioned Balaji Srinivasan on this channel before, and about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years, he did an interview with Tim Ferriss. It was his first interview. He's since done one or two more, and they talked about this. What are the greatest threats to Bitcoin? And I believe they also talked about Ethereum. But they talked about what is the greatest threat to Bitcoin. And at the time, a huge number of miners were in China. And Balaji theorized that if too many miners were concentrated in China, then China could enact something like the Great Firewall of China, but for the Bitcoin network. And there would be a fork in the network where you have Chinese Bitcoin and you have all of the other Bitcoin. Now, that wouldn't kill Bitcoin, but it would sure hurt it. We're talking about a similar scenario that theoretically could happen in the future, where you wouldn't kill the network, but you would neuter it. What's interesting about this idea is the opposite has happened. China, seeing that Bitcoin was a threat to their CBDC digital yuan plans, banned miners. And so instead of concentrating more in a given jurisdiction, the miners all moved out across the globe. Many of them have come to the United States, so the eyes of a government skeptical person like myself would look to the federal government and say, is the federal government going to enact some kind of measure to concentrate power here and then take over the mining network? But that's not what's happening. The political will is in the opposite direction. In China, I believe they banned it because it posed an existential threat to their monetary system. The same is true in the United States, but the rhetoric is about the environmental impact of Bitcoin mining. There's not widespread political will to welcome miners because the perception is that this is a waste, that by doing arbitrary computation, they're wasting electricity and creating excess emissions that don't need to happen, and it's bad for the environment. there's a strong counter argument to that Bitcoin actually encourages the capture of otherwise wasted energy that is totally green and renewable. But we won't go into that here. My point in bringing this up, the political will does not exist to stage this kind of attack that I'm talking about. So I don't think either of these attacks are feasible right now, but it is not hard to imagine a not distant future where they are. The lesson here is simple. I think we need to be looking forward and imagining what these threats might look like. This system is strong if people want to decentralize it and keep it strong. But if collectively all we really care about is line goes up, I get more dollars for my Bitcoin, then the hodlers could be seduced into a vulnerable situation. With any other asset, the obvious thing to do would be to buy it out. I mean, that is what the executive order in 1933 did. It bought people's gold. The interesting counterpoint to that with Bitcoin is that you have people like Michael Saylor, who are very adamant that you should never sell your Bitcoin. I personally have some mixed feelings on that. Michael Saylor is a billionaire. His quality of life is already pretty high. But if a pleb like you and me makes some money in Bitcoin and want to change our lives with it, the most straightforward way to do that is to spend a little Bitcoin. I made a whole documentary about spending nothing but Bitcoin for 3 months. It is, after all, cryptocurrency, currency for trading, a medium of exchange. But as it turns out, the more important role for this has turned out to be money, a store of value. Anyway, it's an interesting thought experiment, and I think a necessary one, because if we don't go down these mental paths to figure out what threats could look like, we may find ourselves someday in an uncomfortable position where you and I, as average hodlers, are disenfranchised and our savings are under threat. Not your keys, not your coins, friends. Hold your keys in a secure and safe fashion, probably a hardware wallet. We will talk more about hardware wallets in depth soon. I think it's an important topic that more people need to understand. What do you think? Are there other threat vectors that I need to be looking at, that we need to be looking at as a community? The collapse of UST and Terra Luna make it very clear that even if something is big and there's a lot built on top of it and it's extremely valuable measured in US dollars, doesn't mean it's invulnerable. Things are only strong and lasting if we build them to be strong and build them to be lasting. That's what I got, team. Let me know what you want to talk about in a future video down below in the comments. Like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell, share with your friends, tell your mom you love her, and we'll talk again soon. Thanks, team.